Hey, good evening, everyone. I will call to order the annual meeting of the Milton School District for August 22nd, 2022. As it is an annual meeting of the district, there are some things that are different than a normal, quote-unquote, school board meeting. I'll explain those fairly quickly. We have a relatively small group here, but just for procedure purposes, I'll let folks know what's going to happen. As such, as an annual meeting, it is not automatic that I chair the meeting. So we'll have an opportunity after we do the pledge to elect a meeting chairperson, and then we will follow the agenda subsequently after that. As an annual meeting, there isn't any public comment, but what can happen is motions and discussion from the floor. And quite honestly, we would encourage that. We're going to want that to happen. We have a statutory obligation to accomplish a few things that are actually the agenda itself. We're going to have a presentation from Rich that is basically a year overview of sorts. I don't know exactly what he's titling it, but something to that nature. And then we're going to have a presentation from Carrie Bradley as a financial overview of sorts that is basically a segue into what we call the budget hearing, which is your opportunity to see what we're proposing for a budget, understand where the numbers come from to some degree, and have your questions answered in that regard. The other things we have to accomplish are to adopt a tax levy for the district. Statutorily, we have to affix or amend, if you choose, the salaries of the school board members, and you are able to direct or give the school board authority to set the annual meeting date at some point in the future, is typically what happens. So those are our sort of statutory obligations, and in the manner that this functions different than a regular board meeting. Motions can still come from my fellow board members because they are truly just electors like all of you folks are. That's why I passed around the sheet at the back there and would encourage you to sign your name and address. We just need to sort of verify, in fact, that you are a district resident. And as such, if you end up as a motion maker or seconder or whatever, we would have the accuracy of that. So I don't know, I'm probably missing something. I've done a few of these, but when they're not the norm, I want to explain to folks what it is that we're going to do. So the first piece I will do before we elect an actual chair is to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, which I would ask you to join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah, if you want to hand it to Rich or Tracy, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, first order of business, as I mentioned, is to elect a meeting chairperson. Floor would be open for nominations as such.
I nominate Joe Martin to be the meeting chair.
Second.
I would accept that nomination. Are there other nominations to chair the annual meeting? And third and final call.
I'd like to make a motion to close nominations and elect Joe Martin meeting chair.
Second.
Thank you. And I beg your pardon, I didn't hear you in time, but motion from Rick, seconded by, was it John or Dave?
Dave, me or someone in the audience? I don't know.
Well, I heard both, so we'll go with Dave. To second the motion. Any discussion on that? All in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. Next, we'll approve the agenda. I pretty much walked through the bullet pieces of it there, so that I don't believe, yes, you can see it up there on the screen. So I would need a motion to approve the agenda that we have proposed.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Motion from Dave Holterman, seconded by John Doomer to approve our agenda. Discussion? All in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. Our agenda is set. Okay, new business is the first piece, number 2 there as you see, and A is a district overview by our superintendent, Rich Dahman, and that's a PowerPoint designed deal. The two main presentations here from Rich and Carrie, certainly we can have questions asked and we'll try our best to get you an answer. I think Rich is going to pause at a point somewhere near the end of his. So if you can, if you've got a question for Rich specifically, hang on to it, I guess, is best advice I can give you, and we'll have you an opportunity to answer that. When we get to Carrie's piece, vice versa. Rich would appreciate it maybe as we're walking through his overview. If you think of something you'd like an answer to, we'll try and do that in the moment. Carrie's piece, the flow is better if we let her present the financial data. And then if you do have a question, we certainly want to try and get you an answer. Is that okay, Carrie?
Correct. That'll be the hearing
Okay.
portion of the budget hearing portion of the annual.
Yeah, at the hearing portion, we'll certainly give you that opportunity. So with that, Mr. Dowman, I will cede the floor.
Thank you. And Carla, if you can go through the slides as we're going through them. The first couple slides are just on the agenda of the annual meeting. So the first few things have been taken care of. We're in agenda item number 2, new business, and it plays out just as Joe had shared. There are a few different motions that will need to be set in action by the electorate in agenda items 2D, 2E, and 2F, but we'll get to those. As Joe had shared, I'll be sharing a district overview from the past year. So if we go to slide 6, slide 6 has some information about our school district. We have 9 municipalities that make up our school district. The vast majority of our 120 square miles is in Rock County, with a small portion that's in the township of Koshkonong in Jefferson County. Our school district overall has a population of about 19,000 people that live within the school district. And our enrollment, we're projecting around 3,400 from 4K through 12th grade. Those 9 municipalities that I spoke to are detailed on the next slide and broken out by the percent of property value. One of the things that Carrie will be talking about is our overall tax base, or our property value in our school district. You can see the 2 different cities, the city of Janesville and the city of Milton, are 2 of the municipalities, 7 different townships that make up a portion of our school district. And you can see the 2 largest in terms of property value. The 2 largest property values are the city of Janesville and the city of Milton. But this slide is a reminder that we have a large school district, a lot of different municipalities that make up that school district. In slide 8, I want to spend a little bit of time on, and it leads into some of the things that Carrie will be sharing later on. And there's 3 different things that are listed here. In the bar graph to the left, that goes from 2016 through 2022, is a measure of our fall tax base. So in those 9 municipalities, which incorporate the 2 cities, but also all of the rural land, that's the total amount of tax base combined across our school district. And that includes residences, it includes commercial property, and it includes agricultural land. And you can see that there's been a steady increase over those years since 2016 in that tax base. And over the last couple of years, that has reached a shade over $2 billion in overall tax base. The bar graph to the right measures 2 different things. It has our total dollar levy, and again, it goes from 2016 through 2022. In the bars, those are separated out into revenue limit levies and non-revenue limit levies, and you can see the difference in the colors in the bars. And then the red line that's going up and down through there is our mill rate. And all 3 of these things are tied together because the mill rate is the levy, the overall levy divided by the tax base. So as you can see, as the years have gone on, the overall levy we had in 2017, 18, and 19 awfully steady or level levy. In 2020, that levy increased as the voters passed a capital referendum at that time. And then in the years since 2020, for 2021 and 2022, again, that stayed fairly steady with even a slight decrease in 2022. And then you can see the corresponding mill rates that went along with those numbers. And obviously, as that tax base increases, if the levy stays level, then the mill rate is going to go down because the mill rate is that levy divided by the tax base. So you can see an increase in the mill rate from 2019 to 2020 as the referendum was passed, but then a slight decrease in the mill rate for 21 and a more significant decrease in the mill rate for 22. And then not only do we want to look at where we stand in those numbers, but also how we compare to other districts. So the next slide is a comparison among Rock County districts in the mill rate. From the fall of 2021, you can see that our mill rate of $8.29 is the lowest of the eight districts in Rock County. And they range from Clinton Community School District at $12.50 down to the school district of Milton at $8.29. On slide 10 is a list of our schools and the grade levels at each of those schools and our projected enrollment for the coming year. We're getting closer to the start of the school year, but even this time of year with a week and a half or so left until students come back, there still will be some changes in what we're looking at for enrollment at each of our schools as new families move into the district and families that are either move out or have moved out over the summer, but we just haven't been notified of that yet. So there will be some changes both up and down in our enrollment over the upcoming couple weeks. That gets solidified actually on that third Friday in September with the third Friday count. One of the things that we've been spending time working on over the past year, and in particular over the past few months, is our strategic plan framework. So the next slide speaks to our vision and mission statement, which haven't changed. They really focus on those opportunities, achievement, and community, and making sure that we are reminded that that's for all, that we don't want to provide those things just for some, but we want to make sure that we provide those things for all in our district. We have the 5 different strategic objectives or pillars in our strategic plan framework. If you recall, at the last board meeting, the board adopted goals in the first 4 strategic objectives, with that 5th one of operations and facilities to be coming up in September. We'll be bringing some data in that area to the first board meeting in September, on September 12th. And then looking to set a goal and focus areas in that area at the second board meeting in September on the 26th. But you can see there listed the goals and focus areas for each of the other 4 pillars for teaching and learning, relationships, climate and culture, high quality staff, and community engagement. The next slide, slide 12, is just another reminder of those strategic objectives and that those are the pillars of our school district. Those key areas are really categories where we focus our work throughout the year. Slide 13 is a diagram of our graduate profile work with our 5 key characteristics of Red Hawk. From our graduate profile, we were able to share this out with our staff this morning in our all staff meeting, and got some good positive feedback from folks following that meeting on how the graduate profile turned out. Ryan Ruggles was able to share some work that will be coming up in identifying for each of those areas what that looks like at different grade levels. So we'll be utilizing some of our professional development time over the coming year to identify what are our expectations for a problem solver, for example, in the 3rd grade. What can 3rd graders be expected to do in that area of problem solving, all the way up through 12th grade. So it's something that incorporated into the work at all of our schools across all grade levels and across all departments. So we're excited about implementing that graduate profile in the coming year. And then the rest of the slides that I'm going to do are kind of highlights from the 21-22 school year and highlights in pictures. And on that first slide, it's some of our facilities projects, whether it's an official end of our referendum projects, the renovations and expansions that we had, ribbon cutting ceremony at our new field house and event commons at Milton High School, continuing projects at Central Park, including our tennis courts, and our new early childhood playground equipment at Milton West. The next slide highlights some of our Milton traditions, and it was great over the past year to be able to return to some of those traditions. Our classrooms were no longer in cohorts, but we were back to more regular sized classrooms. We were able to bring in guest speakers and hold our annual celebrations throughout the year. So some great pictures highlighting some of those different events. On the next slide, another thing that happened throughout the year is a return to being able to have field trips and outside of classroom experiences, both in our local area, and you'll see some places that clearly are not in the Milton area in the pictures there. So students able to travel around the world and travel around our area and have experiences and learning opportunities that they wouldn't normally be able to have is an important part of what we do as a school district. So I think that's one of my favorite slides here, is getting to see students take advantage of those opportunities. At our 4K through 6th grade schools, we had many performances, family nights, and annual concerts that are highlighted on the slide that's on the page right now. So you'll see at each of our different 4K through 6th grade schools, some celebrations and student performances that went on. On the next slide, some of those same things at Milton Middle School. Again, we can see some performances that took place, some large group events that were highlights throughout the year, including the Charlotte's Web musical. We have a Choose to Include event that are highlighted on that page. And then we have a couple slides with high school events. As you know, our Milton High School is the #1 ranked high school in Rock County based on many factors, including advanced placement offerings and career and college readiness for students. You can see some of the different activities and groups on the next slide that took place at Milton High School. They certainly aren't an all-inclusive list, but you'll see our show choir performances, our musical Footloose, and There's No Place drama production. Milton High School marching band took 3rd place at the state tournament. The Milton FFA Milk Quality Team were state champions. The FBLA qualified to compete at nationals in Chicago, and the Milton Forensics team had 2 individuals that placed in the top 3 at the Badger Conference tournament. So some outstanding success in different activities across Milton High School. And the last thing that I want to highlight is a slide that highlights some of our outstanding athletic accomplishments throughout the year. This slide notes all individuals or teams that qualified for the state tournament. In golf, girls golf and boys golf, we had 1 individual qualify for state. In Hannah Dunk in girls golf was a top 10 finisher in the state tournament. Brett Whelan qualified for state in boys golf. We also had individuals qualify in cross country, in girls swimming, including a new team record at the state in the 100 free by Bailey Ratsburg. Gymnasts qualified, was 2nd into the Badger Conference and qualified for the state tournament. Ireland Olstead won the conference in 3 different events. Our wrestling team had great success, finishing 5th overall at the state tournament, with Matt Haldeman runner-up in his weight class and Aiden Sinclair the state champ in his weight class. And this spring, our girls softball team qualified for the state tournament, and the boys basketball team qualified for the state tournament in the winter. And of course, our boys baseball team brought home the first state championship in baseball history to our school district. So we had, in addition to all of the classroom and activities, we had an outstanding athletic year across our school district too. So those were things that I wanted to highlight. If there are any questions from folks on any of the activities, events, any of the information that I shared, I'd be open to answer any questions that folks have. Tracy, did you have something?
I did. On the slide for the fall tax base and the mill rate history, obviously the tax levy hasn't changed, but the mill rate has dropped significantly, 0.89 in that decrease. Was there a property tax adjustment done to, because the other side of that equation would be the tax base. So what is driving the 0.89 decrease? Obviously, it's not, our levy's not moving. So what is that? I guess it's like just.
There's two things that drive that mill rate. It's any changes in the levy, because if the levy grows, if the levy is higher and everything else is static, then the mill rate is going to go up. And if the levy goes down and everything else is static, then the mill rate is going to go down. But the other driver is that tax base. And as the tax base is rising, if the levy stays steady, then we're going to see a decrease in that mill rate. In general, because that overall levy is spread out amongst a higher tax base. And that tax base can grow from new houses or new businesses that start up within the boundaries of our school district, or it can grow from increased value of the houses or ag property or businesses that are already here. And I would say this growth is a combination of both of those things.
There's nothing you can just say is the trigger is that, there's some new development. There's something in this tax base that changed. It seems to be a significant movement. I mean, obviously there was one in 2019, but that was, okay. No, that was my question.
Yeah, and your example is a really good one. A new housing development is going to, in general, raise this bar because you're bringing more homes into that property value. So it's taking that tax levy and spreading it among more people and more property, if you will.
And that tax levy is set where that can't be changed due to state regulations, correct? I don't know, it says I was reading farther ahead, so.
Yeah, I want to make sure I'm
Yeah.
answering that and understanding your question correctly. And that might be a good question when Carrie gets into her presentation,
Fair
to
enough.
make sure it's not misinterpreted by me.
No, I understand. And I only had one other question. Is that Mr. Lyon in that picture? Asking.
Well, Mr. Lyon,
Maybe
answer that
it's
question.
sister.
I think you can see that, thanks for bringing that.
Thank you.
It's good to see our administrators involved in
Yeah.
adoptions at different schools. Thank you for the questions. And then,
Okay, we will segue to Carrie Bradley for the financial report. And as I mentioned, if you have questions for her, please hold on to them until we get near the end of hers, and we'll see if we can't get them answered.
And just because it's important to me to recognize that this is the meeting of the electorate, nothing personal, I'm gonna turn the podium because today is all about the electorate, not that you aren't important as well. But usually at board meetings, I'm here and I try and put my blinders on and I focus on the Board of Ed. But this meeting, and you probably heard me say this last year too, is about the electorate. So thank you for coming and thank you for your interest in the finances of the school district of Milton. One of the things that is fun for me is to see the slides of what children and students and young adults in this community enjoy because of the finances that we invest. And so for me, it's always the connection that is kind of like the feel-good thing for me. Because numbers are numbers and a lot goes into creating them. Even though we're looking at them at a very high level, a lot of people are involved, and a lot of people benefit from the outcomes as well. So I just want to recognize that point. So when we talk about the financial report, we're going to talk at a very high level about the financial position of the district. We're going to talk about fund balance, and we're going to talk about debt. And as required by law, we're going to talk about the employee trust fund. So the first slide, what I forgot to say, The slideshow that I have is at a very high level, and so if you want more information or to dig deeper, it's there for you. And if you have questions about the more information, you can reach out now or after the meeting as well. I know you like listening to me, but you don't like listening to me. Thank you. So let's talk a bit about the financial report at year end. This is unaudited information. The auditors have come, and they have left, but they'll be back again to finish up, and then they'll be back again in December to present to the board of ed our audited financial statements. But at this point in time, this is where we're at, and I think we're pretty close to where we're going to be landing. The first thing that we talk about or start with is our fund balance. We have multiple funds, and the report that we have sums them up so that we started the year with a little over 14.5 million. We have over 62,000 in receipts. I'm not saying this number right, it's 6,200,000. Thank you. Help me out there, Mike.
62 million, maybe? Karen?
62 million, there you go, we're getting there, just keep working at it, right? So we have 14.5 million, we have 62.4 million. And then we subtract out our disbursements and end up with our ending fund equity. The thing to know about fund equity is it's the difference between assets and liabilities. Some of that fund equity is cash, and some of the fund equity, a good portion of it, is restricted for specific purposes. And those are described by law. So when we look at the general fund ending balance of 10 million, approximately 520,000 of that 10 million is set aside for specific purposes. The Board of Education took action to set aside 463,000 in the COVID relief funds that we got partway through the year from the governor and the state. That's federal money to apply to future budgets. We also received a grant last year as well. The Kids Come First mental health grant. We got the money last year, and we're planning on spending it next year, so we have to set that aside. There is also the common school funds. Those monies we receive are for a specific purpose and are to be spent in the year. But when shipping hiccups and the ability to get things here on time happen, we can't expend the funds in the current year, so we set that money aside to expend in the next year. So those are some of the reasons that the fund balance in the general fund would not be available for any expenditure. And then the remainder of those funds are usually restricted to activity within the fund. We do need to take a moment and pause and look at food service, and I can talk about it again when we get there. The food service fund has had a very difficult couple of years because of COVID. And last year, it made a comeback, and so now our balance is close to what it has historically been, slightly higher. The next slide is about our outstanding debt, because we want to be mindful of how much debt the district has. The debt that we have is referendum debt, which means that the levy for it is outside the revenue limit. And that's the bond issue that we did in 2019. I believe it was 59.9 million to start with. We have been making principal payments so that at the end of 22, we're down to 52.8 million. I want to pause just for a moment and talk about something that's called your legal debt limit. It's in the supplement that I created, but I just want to touch base. Our legal debt limit is over, well, here's a big number, $200 million, and we have about 52 million in debt. So, not that we need to borrow that much more money, but we do have the capacity, if we choose to borrow money underneath the legal debt limit. The next slide is our required reporting on our employee benefit trust fund. Those funds are accounted for in 73, and I believe we have balance. Okay, this money or is set aside to support funding of health insurance benefits for our retirees. You may hear the phrase OPEB, or other post-employment benefits. That's another way that it is talked about. And the total liability itself is probably about 12 million, but you can see that we have 3.2 million that we have put in a trust to help fund those benefits. And that is the high-level district financial information. The next portion we're going to move to is the presentation of the budget. And if you were here when the board approved the preliminary budget at the end of June, this should look familiar, okay? And basically, that's what I'm presenting today. And again, as I said before, this is high level. And that supplement is available if you want to. Before we get into the numbers, though, I think we need to just take a moment and recognize that when you're talking about school finance or school funding, we have our own GAAP accounting that we follow, as well as the state, which then reports to the Fed, telling us how we need to do things as well. So it's the fund accounting that we have, and then also we have descriptions. WFR is Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements. They've been around in some form since 1978. And it's a chart of accounts. There's an account code structure, and it is used by public schools. Dimensions are fund, source, object, and function. And the budget information is broken down by fund. And then the other thing to be aware of is each fund has a specific purpose and a set of regulations. And those are in accordance with laws and GAAP, or generally accepted accounting principles. So much of what I describe is all prescribed on how we describe it and talk about it. And my job is to try and make sense of it. I mean, describe it in a way that is more readily understandable. Okay, so the next thing, besides talking about the language of what you're going to see, is I want to continue to emphasize budget planning and the cycles that we go through. And as I had said at the June meeting and before that, we are always working with information that we have available at a point in time. So we're kind of at the beginning of a cycle. Oh, I'm sorry. And then the first point I have too, though, is that the reason we have the financial plan is really to implement the district's educational and operational activities. It's some of the highlights that you saw, and then the things that you see every day in the community and in our schools. And again, it's based on the information that's available at a point in time. And we start with the board approving that preliminary budget, which we are here to present today. The board then, after today's hearing and the electorate setting the levy, the board then has the duty to come back in October and set the final levy. So the levy you're approving today is based on the estimates that we have at this point in time. And then in August, we will come back and then make revisions to that budget again as well as needed. So in October, some of the key pieces of data we're going to have final. One is property values. And I just got a notification today that our property values increased, they're estimating them to increase more than state average. I got it from our financial advisor. But we'll have property values, we'll have state general aid, which is also called equalization aid, that's a type of general aid. And then we will have our student counts as well. And we need all those pieces to complete the revenue limit worksheet, and that's what you've had referred to before. Okay, so for controlled revenues, you need those data pieces to determine the apportionment of the levy and then to set the levy. And that will happen in October. And then the other outlier we always have is it's August, and we have prepared for the children that we believe are going to be here and their needs. But come September 1 or throughout the year, that may change as well. So the idea is that the budget to be responsive to those needs. And those needs change, which is why I say probably like the third time here, that's why it's a point in time. Some people think you're locked in and that's it, and on you go, and that's, I don't know about you, that's not how my life works. But we want to be flexible and responsive to what's going on. And then those estimates that we talk about are really around sources or revenues and purposes and uses that we will call, that are called expenditures. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So when we go through the budget at a high level, we're going to review by fund, and we're going to look at revenues, we're going to look at expenditures, and then we will review the tax levy to conclude. So if you go to the next slide. As I said before, with the accounting system we do fund accounting. Fund 10 is our general operations fund. And we have a variety of sources of revenues or funding streams. If you look at the chart, you can see that next year we're projecting 58% of our revenue to come from the state, 32% from local, which is mostly the tax levy. The 7% from other districts is about incoming open enrollment, and then about 3% from the Fed. So the key takeaway here is to be mindful that the majority of our revenues come from state and local sources. And in the state sources, that's equalization aid, and the local sources are tax dollars. If you look at the chart up above, there's a couple things we want to point out. So if you go under general fund, you see beginning balance, ending balance. And then you get your revenues, and it says transfers, local sources. One of the things to look at is the trend in local sources. 2 years ago, it was almost 16 million, and it has continued to decline. This is related to the state-imposed revenue controls, and basically what that results in, depending on what happens with the enrollment, that's one of the things that is included. But general, the overall trend for us and the state is that our controlled revenues are going down. So those local sources will go down. And then if you go to state sources, and you'll see they went down from the prior year. We were trending up, and then they went down from the prior year. And then notice the increase in the federal sources from the first column to the last column. And this is a reflection of what we are doing, is we are using the money that we have received to close gaps in our budget. So then if you go to the next slide, basically you can see what we use that funding for. In the accounting world, you can either talk about object or you can talk about function. The first table up above, and how we report this in the required format, is to talk about function. The first function is 100,000, and that is for instruction, but it is typically instruction in the classroom that involves teachers or teacher supervision. We have other people in the classrooms that are not in that function because they're in support roles, and we have teachers that are in support roles, and we kind of provide instruction. But the way the accounting system is set up is that that 100,000 function is related to teachers in classrooms. The 200,000 is a very large group, and as you can see, it has activities related to supporting teachers and students in the educational setting. And examples include student services, library services, supervision, business services, and administrative services. And within that 200,000, business services is a very large group as well. Business services isn't the business office, it's operations, it's buildings, it's maintenance, it's utilities, it's transportation. That is, and anything non-instructional pretty much shows up in the business services category and the, to some extent, the administrative services category. So if I look down below them at the pie chart, you can see that our largest expenditures or costs are related to our employees, and that makes sense because we're here to provide for the education of students. The next category is purchase services, And in that orange slice, that also includes teachers on call, which is our substitute teacher service. So they're not showing up in the employee category, but they're a support for education as well. The next fund, that is, the phrase is used rolled up. So we're rolling up to 20, and within 20 are two sub-funds, 21 and 27. And so Fund 21 is a special revenue fund, and we had moved our student activity accounts into Fund 21 because of the change in the GASB accounting requirements. We have 21, so that will include gifts, student activity accounts, and fundraising. But the majority of Fund 20 activity is special education and the excess cost of providing services to students with disabilities. And so when you look at that pie chart, it really makes sense that if those are additional services for students who need specialized instruction, that 84% of the costs are employees, and they are required then to meet the needs of students and provide supports in their IEPs. The debt service fund is actually made up of two. There's a 38 and a 39, and we have 39, which is referendum approved. And the fund balance there, the 913 that you see in the, or 971, the beginning balance, excuse me, okay? That is there. It's restricted fund balance to make debt service payments, and it's for the debt service payment that we have to make in the fall. So although our fiscal year goes from July to June, the way we have to levy for debt is on a calendar year. So if you see a fund balance in debt service, most of that is related to having enough tax dollars to make that payment, and then the revenues will also include interest. The next fund is the capital projects fund, and that is rolled up to 40, and we have two sub-funds. We have 46 and 49. 49 is the referendum projects that are almost complete. And then the other is the long-term capital improvement trust fund that we started a couple of years ago. It's for future projects, and I think we still have a couple of years left before we can access those money. It's a 5-year or 5-year waiting period, excuse me. All right, and the next is food service. And I've already talked about how the fund balance came back from the prior year. And I think there are two things that contributed to that. The USDA, the National School Lunch Program last year, fully subsidized all meals served to children, and that included lunch and breakfast. At the same time, many of the people in this room helped serve lunch because we have a staffing shortage. And many people in district offices as well. We all pitched in to make sure that the students have their meals, but being understaffed also results in a surplus of revenues over expenditures. So, and then the next fund we talked about is 80. This is the community service fund, and it is there for community service activities. Included here are MREC programs and our community parks. And if you look at the revenues come from the tax levy and program fees for MREC. And then the expenditures are for park maintenance, improvements, and MREC programs. And then the last fund we look at is Fund 90, which is a cooperative programs fund. And historically, our alternative program, NECIS, was a co-op. It involved multiple districts, and it was set up as a cooperative program. Over time, other districts stopped participating, and so it got to the point where all of the children are Milton residents. There's really not to have a need to have a co-op anymore. So the program still exists, but we're not doing co-op accounting for it, if you will. And if another district would like to have a child participate, we are open to accepting tuition for that. So, there's a lot of extra steps in accounting for that, and since we didn't have a block program, we moved it to 10. So, the next slide then is an all funds expenditure total. And what we do is take, actually the application does, right? It totals up everything in all funds for the expenditures, but we don't want to count an expense twice. So we back out interfund transfers between funds. We didn't have any refinancing this year. And then just to look at a trend, I also backed out the capital expenditure referendum money so that you can see the trend of spending. And you can see that we are spending a little bit less than we did in the prior year. And on to the tax levy. So just as we have different funds, we have tax levies associated with the different funds. And we have kind of talked about the revenue sources. So you can see we start with the general fund. And as I had mentioned before, right now, we're estimating that our revenue limit calculation and state aid payment will result in a lower tax levy. Our referendum debt, you can see, is going up slightly. And then the community service fund, the levy is going down. If you recall, last year, we had an opportunity to make some improvements to the park, and we had room within our levy to do so. So that has happened, and now we're coming back down, and I think there's a couple of things that we finished left this year. So if you look at our levy is on track to go down for the second year in a row. And then I don't have it on this chart, but the projected mill rate, which is in the supplement for next year, is $7.83. And as Mr. Donovan said, it was $8.29 last year, and the year before it was $9.18. So our levy is going down as well as our mill rate at this point in time. And a lot of times that's where I would stop, but we do need to just take a moment and talk about what's going on with our budget. We have a balanced budget for next year. And if you have been watching the board discussions of the budget, we're trying to look not just at next year, but the next 3 years. We don't know what's going to happen in year 2 or 3 of the legislature, but we need to keep an eye on it. And that is one of the things that we've been talking about. We also have federal money available right now to sustain our budget and also continue to work on meeting the needs that are identified that are related to the original sources of funds and that's the student needs related to COVID. So in the notes, and this is what was mentioned before, 80% of our revenues are impacted by the revenue limit, and they consist of the local property tax levy and general state aid. And you all know that by now because I've said it multiple times, right? All right. So for 22-23, we're not anticipating an increase in the revenue limit per member per law, and that's part of the formula that they can choose to increase the amount by an increment, and that amount has changed over time, but for next year, there is it's zero. There's no additional funds driven through the formula that way. We plan to use approximately $920,000 in one-time federal funds to address our annual increases. And we need to be mindful that one-time funds will not close the ongoing gap in the future. And that those future gaps between revenues and expenses will need to be addressed through budget reductions or increases in revenue. So we're hitting the hearing portion.
Barry, do you want to pause and see if there's any questions before we get to the hearing portion?
In my head, the hearing portion is where the questions are asked, if that's okay. But yes.
Sure. In the on the Fund 20, the special projects, for the special education, Fund 27, and maybe that is where more of it is. I see the 2020 audited, 6.4 million, with expenditures of 6.1, and then that goes up almost $1 million in 21-22. Is that student services? Is that what the increase there is?
Are you in summary sheet or the detail sheet?
I'm just in the presentation already.
Okay,
And I can flip over to the summary of that.
Tracy, can you share again which slide you're on, so that everyone's looking at the same thing?
It's the one that says Fund 20 on the top, sorry, I don't, 34. So thank you, I don't repeat
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was looking on the columns just from the 20, the audited to the unaudited, it went from, revenue expenses about, 6.3, 6.1, then now it's 7.2, 7.2, and now 7.2, 7.4. So the first thing that I look at is saying the expenditures are outpacing the revenues for the budget. Because it's usually, I guess, the beginning to balance it. Is that the way it works? But I'm just curious what's causing the drop jet.
okay, so there's a couple pieces going on, so at a high level, I'm gonna give you a high level answer, and then if we wanna dig into the detail, we can.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a couple things to remember. The 287,000, that we have in remaining fund balance, part of that is from folding in the Fund 21 with the 27. I do believe that the activity in Fund 27, part of it is attributed to spending more federal grant funds for IDEA in those 2 years. So that's something that we can readily see. I'm just trying to, looking at the details here quickly. I'm not seeing pupil services jumping out. I'm seeing increases kind of throughout the budget. And then the other piece would be for us to look at, we can either look at it by function detail on here, or we can also dive into the object if you want to know exactly what is driving the increase. I do think that we had a change in student needs that's driving some of this. And then also, there is federal money that's available for special education. And that money has increased over the past couple of years. So that will also provide an opportunity to do more for students. And then another example, like this year, the year that's concluding, we also had that transition grant that was written for special education transitions. That wasn't a large sum, but that's again more state money. But
No, I think.
I'm looking at the staffing, we're trying to pull apart the pieces. I can't explain more than that.
No, and I appreciate it. I think it's good to really look at that and to give, student support where they need it, if they have a transfer there. I think that's a really, a good thing to see there. The other question I had when you went on the budget notes page, where you talked about the 80% of our revenue is impacted by the revenue limit, is that the pupil? Is that like how much per pupil times how many pupils? Is that, I'm trying to, because it doesn't actually have how it's calculated.
No, it isn't. It's a supplement, but you are correct. It's at a high level, you're correct. And that has to do with the revenue limit calculation. And usually we talk about membership rather than pupils, because membership means something different. But at a high level, that is the driver of the majority of our revenues. And so when that per member doesn't increase and our membership starts going down, right, then that means shrinking resources.
Is that what sort? And they haven't spoken about increasing that rate for inflation or because obviously you have fixed costs in your school.
Correct.
And from a logical perspective, even if you lose 10 students, you're not gonna. And I understand it's a broader idea, but when you think about it, so there's no discussion on inflation adjustments for that, the revenue limit?
Well, there's a lot of history on that. But so where we're at right now in the process is we are in year 2 of the state budget cycle, and it's 0. So in the winter, January, February, March-ish. Actually, January, the process I believe starts off. And then that is when that question will be considered, is when the new budget cycle begins. And they will look at what they're gonna do with school funding. And this is definitely one mechanism for school funding, and then they have some others as well. But since we're talking about the revenue limit, I want to take the opportunity to kind of talk about what the formula does, if that's all right. Bear with me, okay? I think this is a good opportunity. You all heard this, but I'll continue to talk about it. So the revenue limit was put in place in the early 90s. And it was coupled with 2/3 state funding, and it was, and then also the qualified economic offer, which was used to control salaries and benefit costs. It was put in place essentially to control property taxes, but the state committed a significant amount of money, funding for public education. And so then over time, the formula increased every year with that per member for several years, and then there was also inflation on top of that increase. And then at one point in time, when the state was very short, getting short on revenues, let's just, we'll go with getting short and then we'll go to really short, right? So that number went down and was reduced, and then I believe another year it was 0. And then 1 year it was actually negative. And other things that were happening with the law that allowed us to work through the negative number. And then it was 0, and then, so it's going up and down over time is my point. At the same time, a new aid was introduced called per pupil aid. And so usually when you look at this, you can look at what's happening with the revenue limit, but then you also can look at what's happening with per pupil. But revenue limit to me is our bread and butter. And I'm very mindful of what happens to our base revenue, which is line 1. Because once your base is gone, it's gone. And so whatever multiplier you end up with, okay, you can build the base back up eventually as your trends change or as they change the formula. But that's just the thing to be mindful of, is that is part of the way the formula works. The formula was designed to control property taxes, and if a district finds that funds aren't sufficient, the system was also designed to have a relief valve to go to referendum for operations. And so that's the yes, this is what the law says, but the law also says that if you believe you need more money, you go extra tax. So just kind of, that is the balancer, if that path is chosen, it doesn't exist.
And will that, so the budget cycle starts, that would not impact this current school year. It would only impact the budget for next year. If the state legislation decides to increase that per pupil and the revenue limit number, remember.
Yeah, the formula, that's a future.
That's a future.
This year is current law, we're set,
And it's 0.
and it's 0, and we have one-time funds available to stay in the game.
And are there still some of those remainder as well? One-time funds, or is this these?
Yeah, no, we have, we're committing a portion of them, but we also have, funds, that, available into 2024 for the federal funds. And then also the 463,000 that we received, we're gonna be onto that for future budgets as well.
And does that have to be spent by 2021?
The federal money does.
Yeah.
The state, was federal money through the state, but that does not. So it's, look at the future, and we're planning as best we can. And we should be able to, have time to make decisions. Depending upon how things unfold.
I can share just a little bit to piggyback off how Carrie ended on depending how things unfold, because when we make long-term financial plans, there's a lot of assumptions that we have to make because we're uncertain about the things that we don't, especially the things that we don't control. So as we look at the graph here, we know that Obviously, we have that $920 difference in the coming year in our estimated expenditures and our revenues. And we know if our assumption is that that blue line is going to continue on the same slope and the red line is going to continue on the same slope, that number every year is going to continue to get larger and larger. At the same time as our pot of federal funds to fill that gap gets smaller and then it's gone. So as Carrie shared, the state legislature will have a lot to do with the potential growth of that blue line, our revenues. And that's something that we make assumptions on, and we'll know more this spring, hopefully on that. But one of the things that we worked really hard to do is find that balance of providing a high quality education for all students, but also being fiscally responsible. If you recall the slide that showed our mill rates compared to other Rock County districts, that was this past year when our mill rate was $8.29. As Carrie shared, it's projected, and again, that depends on where the equalized value of our district ends up and where our levy ends up, but it's projected to go down to $7.83. But every district across the state is facing the same fiscal cliff of revenues from the state not keeping pace with rising expenditures across the district. And really there's, as she shared, two ways that we can address that is to either decrease the red line, and decreasing the red line means that we offer fewer things for our students. That's reducing our budget, which is what mainly people, and there's other parts to it, but mainly people. And the other way to address that is to increase the blue line, which is either the state or locally bringing a operating referendum to the taxpayers at some point in the future. So those are the things that we're thinking through. Carrie did share earlier that we got news from Baird today that, again, this is projected, but our equalized value across the district, statewide, anticipating a 14% growth in overall equalized value across the whole state. And our projection is a shade higher than that at a little bit above 16%. So if you recall that first slide that I had shared that had the three different parts, that left part where it was growing fairly rapidly is expected to grow even more rapidly across our district over the coming year, which again spreads out that levy among more of a tax base and decreases the mill rate even further potentially. So for us and for the board in the coming months, part of that discussion is how do we continue to provide that high quality education for our students and remain fiscally responsible, and where that balance lies.
Carrie, can I give a high level as far as the state budgeting process goes when it comes to things? Because the state does a biennial budget, so and you have explained that thoroughly even during the last budget cycle, whereas the district is a single year budget. So last year when the district went through their budget for this past year, the legislature had already passed their budget, so the district knew as we were coming into this year what kind of the expectations were. The legislature will be coming back into session in January. Typically, the budget is introduced by the governor in late February, early March, and then the legislature will go through the budget process. That usually is typically done and passed by July 1. They try. There's years that it doesn't, but they try. So at that point in time is where the legislature is going to be looking at education, transportation, DHS, like every realm of state government that money goes into. DPI is still the number one, with DHS in a close second. And so these are things that the legislature does take into consideration. There is nothing right now that would prevent the legislature, with the amount that we've been facing with inflation and a budget surplus, to be coming back possibly in a special session or extraordinary session to be able to utilize some of that one-time funding to kind of help out. But once again, as Carrie has indicated, this is only one-time funding. So, so just to kind of piggyback on it, the state budget is a 2-year cycle. So the school district knew in advance, this is what we will be facing on the second year of the biennium. But it's still, there's a lot of that moving parts. And, you know, you can only project out, what you know.
Right, if I could just, you bring up a point that I did not emphasize, but when you're budget building, it's a lot easier to build a budget in year 2 of the biennium because there's a lot more known than when you're going into the, waiting for the first year of biennium, and that's a good point to bring up too. So. Yeah.
Any other questions for Carrie on her data presentation?
Carrie, I have a question for you. On Fund 73, the fund balance looks like it's 3.2 million. You threw out a number of 12 million. What was that number?
The $12 million is our liability. It's an actuarial determined number. If we were to fully fund the benefits that have accrued, we would need $12 million. But we don't fully fund. We have about $3 million, and then we put in that money on an annual basis.
Okay.
Thanks. Good question.
Anyone else? Okay, if not, we are going to roll forward. We, as I mentioned earlier, have a few cursory tasks that we have to accomplish. The first of which, Carly wants to fast forward for me just a pinch. Letter D up there is the opportunity for the electorate to establish a school tax levy for the coming year. And with the numbers that Carrie went through there, we have a suggested motion that encapsulates, I believe there are 3 different pieces, funds, if you will, that have carry tax levies with them, and ultimately a total at the end of that motion. So here I would entertain a motion from the floor, and the suggested language is such that it would be easy for you to reiterate.
I move that the district levy a tax of $14,215,958 for current operations, $4,203,525 for referendum approved debt, $204,525 for referendum approved debt, and $433,159 for community services, for a total all-fund tax levy of $18,853,642.
Thank you. Does that motion have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Sarah Stuckey, seconded by John Kramer. As you all heard, I will not repeat it. I'm assuming everyone can see it in its entirety up on the board. Any discussion on that motion? And given our crowd size, I will do a voice vote here. All in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That motion clearly passes. Thank you for that. Next, we have a task or an opportunity to fix the salaries of the board members and authorize expenses. And a motion to that effect is suggested also. If anyone is of a mind to, they could offer that.
I move to set salaries for board members at $2,000 and the board president at $2,500 per year, and to authorize the payment of actual and necessary expenses incurred by the Board of Education members while traveling in the performance of duties.
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Tracy Hanna, seconded by Chris Tukendorf. As you just heard, to fix the salaries of the board members. Discussion on that? Those in favor of approval signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That motion passes. And last piece of business, statutorily, we are able to pass a motion that would allow the board to set the date and place and time for the annual meeting that would succeed this one, in other words, 2023's.
I move to allow the Board of Education to establish the date and time for the 2023 annual meeting as provided under state statute 120.08.
Second.
Thank you. Motion from Jeremy Bildhorn, seconded by Chris Kukendorf, to let the board establish next year's annual meeting date. Discussion on that? All in favor of approval of that signify with aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Thank you. That clearly passes. Thank you for that. That completes our mandatory tasks and would bring us to what would be the adjournment portion of the annual meeting. We will take a short recess upon adjourning, and we'll have a regular board meeting with a separate agenda.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah, I would look for a motion to do so.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion from Jen Kramer, seconded by Renee Steve Bush to adjourn. Discussion, all in favor of adjournment of the annual meeting, and thank you for coming. If you choose not to stay for our regular portion, signify with an aye.
Aye.
And opposed, thank you, thank you, thank you. 5 minutes, and we will reconvene.
There's some trees on the counter.